Shalom, hello, and welcome to another Parsha lesson. This week's Parsha, or this lesson's Parsha, is going to be from Tazria. So Tazria is in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, and we are in chapter 12, verse 1, going all the way through to chapter 13, verse 59. So Tazria literally is translated as conceives and comes from the root of this word is zara, which means to sow. So yes, you can see why this word is used in that regard. So in this parsha, we are introduced to a couple of very interesting and important topics and concepts. And this is the idea of tamei, which is from a human perspective. So the idea of tamei and tahor. So tamei is to be defined as ritual impurity. And this is something that we will develop as we talk about this. And the opposite of this is tahor, which is ritual purity. So anyway, verse 2, speak, Dabir, B'nai, Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, lay more and say, Ishar ki tazria. So when a woman conceives, so here's our word here, tazria. And when she vayalda, when she bears, a zachar, in this instance is the word for male. Now there's something really interesting about this word, because zachar also is related to, or it literally means the word to remember. So to be a male and to remember are the same type of words. Very interesting. And so when she conceives and she bears a male child, so vitama, she shall be unclean. So this is our word tamar, which we translate as unclean. So she will be tamar for shivat yarmim, for 7 days. Now, here we have this, and I just want to point this out because I find this quite interesting, because as at the time of her menstruation. So this word here, and this is a nidar. Nidar is the word that they've translated as menstruation, but that's not really what the word. I can see why they try to translate it that way, but it's not really, because nidar literally means separation. So in her time of separation, which is generally the time of the menstruation. So she shall be titma. She shall be titma. So this parsha approaches the condition of tamei as human impurity by talking about childbirth and an extremely interesting and mysterious, I must say, skin affliction, which is called zara'at. Okay, and here's the interesting thing about this as well, is that oftentimes you will see it translated as leprosy. So what they did is they comported the word, or this condition, the zara'at condition, to be the same as leprosy, but it is not. It is not, and it's quite interesting when you go into, if you were to compare, and they did this as well, so Maimonides does this, talks about, so what is leprosy? What are the actual skin conditions of leprosy? And do they actually match up to the zara'at? And so zara'at is something that you can read further on in this parsha. It talks about this weird thing going on with skins that needs to be looked at. And if it looks a certain way, then they need to be quarantined, and then after a certain quarantine time, if they go and the Kohen goes and have another look and says, if it's changed and it's done this and that, then it is zara'at, and they need to be quarantined some more. So this is a very involved process going on with this. But it doesn't actually comport with leprosy. And the interesting thing is the reason why they thought it was leprosy is because of what the Torah talks about here in this parsha, is that they have to be quarantined outside the camp, which is something that happens with people who have leprosy as well. And so that's really the only reason. But the interesting thing about zara'at as well is that it's not only a skin affliction, it is also something that can happen on your clothes. What is going on here? And again, the Torah goes into some elaborate detail about that, but it just doesn't stop there. It can occur on the walls of the internal walls of a house. So what, you say, Ma, Ma, what is going on here? What is this all about? And we'll get to that if we can at a later date. But what we need to really talk about and tackle, firstly, however, is this concept of why tamei, to become ceremonially unclean, is important and what it actually signifies. So the first time we actually see this concept described is in relation to a Kohen and contact with a dead body. So we see this in Pasha Shmini after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. This is the first time we see it. So Aharon and his two remaining sons, are not allowed to remove the bodies. Or even mourn, although the mourning issue was special to that day, as I have said. So they actually have to, some cousins have to come in and take the bodies out. So when you look at what it says in Vayikra 10, verse 10, in order, and this is the important thing that we've got here, where we really see the juxtaposition between these two words. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean. And here we see our words highlighted, ha tamei, so that which is unclean, and uven, and between ha tahor, that which is clean. So here's the important thing. So Hashem makes a distinction between these things, because protocol defines our approach, and this is to establish in our hearts that holiness is a conscious choice, and that there are things that will negatively impact our capacity to draw near. And there's something else that I'm reminded of that Rabbi Sachs talks about in relation to this and why this is important, because as you will recall, the book of Vayikra, we've started to discuss this, is about the sound of priesthood. It's about what it means to learn how to become a priest, and that there are layers here. There are layers of protocol, of what it means to be in a position to be a conduit of what Hashem desires to have happen in creation. In other words, you become a servant of his desire. It's not to be a servant of ritual. The ritual is the thing that allows us to establish the difference between things. And this is why this verse here in verse 10, in chapter 10, is so important, because this comes back to the idea of what is the Mishkan about. The Mishkan gives us a reference point within the natural realm about what it means to be in the place where the fusion of heaven and earth occurs. That place where we can come into the atmosphere, into the environment of this abject holiness. This is why it's called the Holy of Holies. And that allows us to realize that we have the capacity to distinguish between the two, distinguish between what is holy and what is common. And that approaching that place, it causes us to confront that. Where are we more naturally inclined than we are spiritually inclined? And what does that mean? How does that affect the way we live our lives? Are we pursuing God with all of our hearts, or is some of our hearts caught up within the natural environment? And this is a really important discussion, because part of us has to be. We are literally a fusion of heaven and earth. I talk about this because it's so important to me to realize this, is that our priesthood is the service of both realms. Our heart is supposed to be engaged with the way the natural environment is functioning. But there's also a part of us that has to be engaged with the way our spiritual nature functions in relation to the way we walk with God. And that is actually supposed to be the thing that captivates us the most. Because when we allow that, when we allow our heart to be captivated by the holiness of God, to distinguish between that which is common and that which is not common, between that which is holy unto Him and that which is in the natural arena, then we learn how to serve the natural arena in a much better way. Again, it's such a complex discussion, and there's so much to talk about here. But our capacity to distinguish, and coming back to what I wanted to say about Rabbi Sachs, is he talks about that the priesthood of Hashem serves life. It's all about us promoting life, or let me say this better, about us facilitating the growth of life, that which brings greater abundance in the way we live, that which brings greater abundance and facilitates deeper relationship one with another, because we are in the process, we're in that place of wrestling with how we walk with God, and we're coming into higher elevated areas of perception that allow us to perceive more of Him, cope with more of Him, and we bring that back into this environment to raise up this environment so that this environment can function at a higher level as well. It's about life. It's about that which is clean is literally that which facilitates the greater capacity for life. That which is unclean is something that diminishes that capacity. And so Rabbi Sachs talks about the priesthood of Hashem is all about life. And that's why we see in the previous Parsha, what is Hashem talking about? He's talking about the things that make us tamei in the animal kingdom, are eating certain things, but there's this other aspect of what it means to be a priesthood. Don't venerate that, or don't approach that which lifts up death. And that's really important. That's something fascinating to stop and think about. There is a profound juxtaposition going on here, because you look at what happens in the hearts of people around the world, and the different way spiritual systems work, how some of them focus on death. Think about that, and what comes of that. I remember as a young man myself, just talking about my own personal experiences, how I struggled with the arena of depression, and how everything was dark, and there was this tendency towards that which spoke about death. It was in the music, it was in the way I would dress. There was something more alluring about the realm of death. But what's happening here is Hashem is saying, if you allow that to become your focus, then the nature of the way life functions as a river of living water, the function of that to have an expression in you is diminished. Therefore, don't associate with the things that sit around death. And the way to learn how to do it is to say, as he's saying in my priesthood, there are certain aspects of holiness and elevated status that says to you need to be aware of the effect of death upon the way you serve me. And when I realized that, when I was listening to Rabbi Sachs talk about that, everything Hashem does is to facilitate life. And that's what this is about, because we can get really caught up in the idea of clean and unclean. What does that mean? What it means is that which is when we are tahor, when we are ritually pure, it's because we are focused and we are caught up, and all our decision making process is towards facilitating the way we walk with Hashem. And that always brings us into a greater expression of life, a greater expression of living. And so again, we can look at other verses, Vayikra 11:44 and 47. Look at what it's saying here. For I am Hashem Elohim. Respond to me. This is the way I translate it. They consecrate yourself, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. So here we have this word here, v'chit kadeshtem, v'chit kadeshtem. Okay, so consecrate yourselves. But here, what do we see in here in the middle? This is kadesh. This is the word for holiness. But what type of verb is this? Because this is a verb. This is action. This is doing. This is conscious choice being made manifest in the way we walk. This is a het pael verb. Het pael, what it means, it's responsive. It's reciprocal. In other words, it's the same as the word het halech. When Hashem is speaking to Avraham, when he's speaking to Noah, oh my gosh, what is he saying? Learn in the way you walk is a manifestation of the way you respond to my voice, the way you respond to my word. The way you hear matters, the way you walk matters, it all matters. In other words, we consecrate ourselves, we respond listen to this, respond to me by keeping yourself sanctified and be holy, because I am holy. Just wonderful language. Listen to this, 1147. To make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. I mean, it's just so many wonderful things going on here. We also see that Parsha Shemini ends with the repeating of the words of what he says in chapter 10, verse 10, to distinguish, to make a distinction between that which is tamei and that which is tahor. So again, there's something remarkable going on here in the way the language speaks to us in this way. He's saying to us, I'm telling you about these things because you have the capacity to know. And if you have the capacity to know or to learn to know, you have the capacity of choice. In other words, again, he's saying the way you choose to walk, the way you choose to respond to this will affect the way you feel about drawing near to me. And that's a powerful lesson. That's a powerful insight, because we start to realize, I mean, look back in our own lives. I can certainly look back in mine. And you feel, I mean, you say to yourself, I feel so unworthy because this, and this, because I did this and that. Somehow I feel unclean. And it affects the way I respond to God. Hashem is literally saying here that you have the capacity to learn what that is about. You have the capacity to be in control of that. Oof, man, that's... Back to your notes, Carl. So the heart of this, as we first see it, is that there are circumstances that occur that need to be identified as contrary to the act of serving God. The priesthood was required to know that if you touch this or that, you cannot perform a Mishkan service for the rest of that day. Now, it didn't disqualify you completely, entirely, forever, just for the day. Man, wow. As you are now tamei until the evening. So what's most interesting about this is that this process was designed to keep them safe. To keep them safe. Coming back to, the two sons of Aharon, to keep them safe. This emphasizes the point that the Mishkan was a place of extreme holiness. This is why only a Kohen could enter this area, because they understood protocol. They understood protocol. When I think about it this way, let me just finish my notes. So deviate was extremely dangerous, as we saw with Avihu and Nadav. So this again brings up a very important perspective. There really is no demarcation between the secular and religious. That division is our making. what happens in the secular is just as spiritual as what occurs in the religious, because we are in both domains. We are in both domains. And just coming back to what I was thinking about before, understanding that the Mishkan, the Mishkan was a place, well, I don't want to say it was a place of extremes, but it was a place of knowing that you were approaching something that required respect, and that the protocol is in place to help you understand what that is all about. And I think this is just something quite remarkable for me as well, in that if we come back to our original premise of what the book of Vayikra is all about, when we started talking about this, we come across this verse in Shemot again. You will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So what is it again? A mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests, a vegoy kadosh, a holy nation. So the thing that I have to sort of stop and challenge myself with here is that Hashem is describing the protocols here, and our capacity to understand what is tamei, what is tahor, what is clean, what is unclean, what facilitates deeper relationship, what doesn't. And it's not about us looking at this and saying, well, this is only for the Kohen. It's only for the sons of Aharon. But when we realize that it's a mamlechet kohanim, it's a kingdom of priests, that this is the potential of how we will learn to serve as well. So coming back to our Parsha, we see that the beginning of this Parsha deals with the tamei of childbirth. What is important is that this deals exclusively with being able to go into the area of the Mishkan, as you will note in verse 4. For 33 days she will remain in the blood of purity. Anything sacred she may not touch, and into the Mishkan she may not enter until the completion of her days of purity. So now we can address what the protocol of tamei and tahor is. The protocol of approaching and engaging with the Mishkan. This type of observance is only applicable when a Mishkan or a Beit HaMikdash is in operation. So as you can imagine, this Parsha is difficult to comprehend even on a simple level, just as the laws of the kosher animals, the kisharut, in the previous Parsha, it is hard to fathom the why. The simple approach, however, is to perceive that there are things that restrict our capacity to come close, and there are things that enhance the process. Tamei tahor. So when we read Rashi's opening comments on this Parsha, we are also introduced to a very interesting discussion. So Isha ki tazria. So a woman, when a woman delivers. Now Rashi translates the word tazria as deliver, but as you'll recall, so again, and this is, I find this quite a fascinating usage of the word here. So we again, tazria here in the blue, when a woman conceives, Rashi translated as when a woman delivers. The simple meaning of the verse here, and this is why Rashi translates this as delivers, because this is about when she gives birth to the child. So what I would like to do is I'm going to try and address the idea or the issue here that I think really comes to the forefront of this. Why is it that when a woman gives birth to a child, she becomes tamei, she becomes unclean? What does that mean? Is she unclean? Because it's not hard to put a negative connotation on the term unclean. So let's try and just move that aside. Let's not use the term unclean. Let's use the word tamei, okay, which is translated. I mean, with either way you look at it, and I think we should acknowledge this. It doesn't look good. It makes you feel when you say I'm unclean, I'm unworthy, there's something wrong with me. That is not what is going on here. I really don't believe so. And I think somewhere along the line, we attached a very negative connotation to this. It means to be unclean. I am unclean. I can't come near God because I'm unclean. And so on a simple level, what is the Parsha saying here? When it says, okay, a woman is given birth, she is tamei for a specific set of days. And at the end of those days, there's a process by which she will go through to bring offerings and this sort of thing. But it says something else very, very interesting that's sort of hidden in there. I'll just quickly deal with this, and then I want to try and approach this topic from another direction, which may work, it may not. We'll see how we go. So what we read in verse 4 is, then she shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. And this is the important part, she shall not touch anything holy nor come into the sanctuary or come into the Mishkan until the days of her purifying are completed. So on a simple level, what Hashem is saying, when you've given birth to children, the ritual and all those things, they're not important. In fact, I'm saying to you, don't look to those things. Don't go. You don't need to go and do those things. Don't go and do those things. Don't come into the sanctuary. She's not supposed to become involved in the ritual of the Mishkan. She doesn't need to do those things. And so this is the simple issue of what it means to be tamei and what it means to be tahor, is your capacity to come into the Mishkan. In a natural, physical, ritualistic sort of a thing, you don't get to do that. It doesn't mean you are somehow separated from God. I wholeheartedly believe that this is not what that is talking about. But it's talking about protocol. There are protocols in place and functioning in that environment and in that arena. It doesn't stop you from drawing near to God spiritually at all. So we can address what the protocol of tamei and tahor is, the protocol of approaching and engaging with the Mishkan. So I just want to read to you some of the things I wrote down. And again, I'm developing these ideas, but I want to share them with you because I think it's important to realize that. And I've talked about this before. When we are dealing with something complex or something simple, the way we journal matters. It helps so much in the process. It helps us clarify thoughts. It helps us clarify and articulate discussion and even questions. So I was looking at this and I was trying in my heart to work out what is going on here, because there are different things that the commentators say. And let me just quickly read one of that we find in the Mishkan. In the Chumash, the Chumash commentary, where it talks about childbirth and purification. So the creation of human life is the most sublime phenomenon in the universe. By bringing a new life into being, man and woman become partners with God, who gives a soul to their offspring. But this new life begins with tumah, spiritual impurity, to show people that the mere fact of life is not enough. So this is a bit of a homiletical insight. Life must be a tool for the service of God, otherwise it is nothing. After this period of contamination, the new mother begins her cleansing process, culminated by the bringing of an offering. Before she brings it, she cleanses herself of the contamination, but she still may not consume sacrificial meat or terumah. And this is a pretty interesting insight, which is talking about she can't come into that. So the only person that can do this is the daughter of a Cohen. Because the mere absence of contamination is not yet the fulfillment of man's goal. Human aspiration must rise higher than the elimination of the negative. Man, that's a real deep insight. It must strive for positive achievement. One is not completely cleansed until one has come to the resting place of God's presence with an offering that represents atonement for the past and dedication for the future. Now listen to this. These offerings and rituals symbolize that birth inaugurates the beginning of the ongoing privilege of raising the newborn child to a life of dedication and holiness that will enable God to say to the child and his parents, "You fulfill the purpose of the entire work of creation." So there is another approach to the concept of tumei, spiritual impurity, that views all tumei as related either to death or to the failure to create life. The tumah of a corpse and of dead animals is obvious. The mitzvah is explicitly compared to a dead person. So this is the person who's suffering from a zara'at, this strange skin affliction. The lost seed of the zav and the Vayikra represent the failure to develop into a new organism with new life. So they say there, similarly, menstruation follows the failure of the egg to be fertilized and implanted in the womb. After childbirth, a woman experiences the separation from the live embryo that had been growing within her. In contrast, the newborn infant is not tamei, since his life is expanding, not contracting. Perhaps the double length of tumah that the mother undergoes after the birth of the daughter may be due to the daughter's possession of a womb that itself will ultimately contain an additional life. So again, the commentators here are grappling with this issue as well. So let me read you my notes here. I'm grappling with this thing myself, trying to come to terms with why does the Torah talk about this way? So why then do we see this parsha opening with a distinction that giving birth makes a woman tamei? That's my question. That's my question to Hashem. I would suggest that it is exactly because she has brought forth a human that is at its most frail, at the beginning of its ascension back to the heights that it has come down from. Tamei does not separate us from Hashem. It makes us consciously aware that our choices and actions are what cause us to turn away and not seek closeness. To truly nurture someone, we have to understand their true condition, the actual capacity both cognitively, physically, and spiritually. I believe that this process is here because that is what mothers do. They exist in the actual and the potential. They nurture towards the realization of potential because they can see the actuality of the current state, just like Hashem. Hashem says you are tamei not because of wrongdoing, but because that is what is needed to focus on the beginning, not on the service of now in the realm of ritual, but on the moment of frailty as a beginning. Only mothers can truly identify with this. For humans, tamei is not a state of being, it is a marker of temporary condition as we journey towards Hashem. The tamei of childbirth is a witness to mothers to remember and equip them with a profound connection of knowing that we all start as these fragile beings, but progress towards ones who can consciously partner with Hashem to bring life into creation. The most remarkable and staggering insight in that women, when they become mothers, are saying that they agree to become tamei on behalf of their children, because these fragile, innocent human babies are a higher priority than temple service. And it empowers and it appears that Hashem wholeheartedly establishes this in Torah. So these are the thoughts that I'm trying to develop about that in regards to what this is, and trying to see more deeper into the layers of it. So again, these are just my thoughts on the matter, but I just felt it would be nice to share them with you in the way that I've journaled this thought process. And again, it leads me to this place of awe. What the awe of how woman, the feminine nature of humanity, and what it means to be a mother, and what it means to nurture. And again, this is really interesting because it reminds me of when Hashem established the sanctity or the importance of Shabbat. Shabbat was more important than building the Mishkan. Nurturing a newborn child is more important than the service of the Mishkan. The nurturing of human life. It's just remarkable that there's so much to be developed here, and I must state this, I'm still wrestling with this concept and this idea because, it's something that's outside my perspective. Now, there's something else here that I just really wanted to quickly touch upon as well that I guess comes through in something that Rashi talks about here. So Rashi comments on the idea on the beginning of the statement that something that the Amora and Rabbi Simlai says. He says this, is just as the fashioning of man came after the cattle, the beast and the fowl in the Torah's account of creation, so is his law explained after the law of cattle, beast and fowl. So this is what Rashi is quoting from the Midrash here. So they find it interesting that there seems to be a very interesting progression here. So if you go back into the story of creation, on the sixth day, you have the last thing that it's talked about in the creation is the creation of man. So man comes after all these other things, and yet man is the most important. And it's like they're trying to say this. It appears that the way the Torah progresses through things is it introduces a simple concept, and then it moves towards something that is not simple, something that is more complex. So there's an expansion of perception in the idea and the way things work in the Torah. And this matters to us. So we begin to realize that there's a progression towards the capacity to discuss and perceive something that is more deeper. And that depth of complexity connects us into an arena of perception that allows us to see more of the heart of God. And so I want to share just quickly, because this idea here is fascinating to me. Something that impacted me very early on in regards to when I started investigating and learning how to engage with the alphabet, and which brought me, and this is quite remarkable because the beginning of my journey into the alphabet started with a simple idea about the interactive engagement of language. Now, I'm using terms now that I didn't have back then, but back then it was living letters, and that was it. It was a profoundly strange yet a very simple idea. When you really unpack and unlayer it, you see over time an expansion that draws you towards greater conversation. And so that realization or revelation about this Hebrew alphabet moved me, guided me towards something. It guided me towards what? Towards his Torah, and towards the idea that if I can perceive that language as living, then I have the capacity to perceive this word as living as well. It's a remarkable progression. So let me get back to my notes. So there is a principle here that I would like to try and elucidate. The progression of learning as simple to complex. Seems obvious when you say it that way, doesn't it? So the progression of learning as simple towards complex. Restricted perception that expands to increasing perception, which I believe is beautifully communicated to us in the imagery of mother and child. What is the mother doing? Her focus moves away from the arena of ritual, and the ritual of the Mishkan is to make us aware of the engagement of what sits inside and just beyond, on the other side of the ritual. It's engagement of the holy arena where, and why I say this is because that arena is where our focus should only be on Hashem. Only on Hashem. If our focus only stays upon the idea that the ritual itself is holy, then we forget the purpose of the ritual is to draw us into relationship. And what is the mother doing here? The mother says, okay, that ritual is important, but what is the most important thing here? Is my capacity to learn how to nurture life to greater capacity. Okay, so let me show you something that I developed a few years ago that really helped me sort of come to terms with what I was starting to perceive in regards to the expansion of perception as awareness of relationship to be able to cope with being shown more of Hashem. And here's this wonderful diagram that I came up with. Let me explain it. So firstly, the usual order of learning Torah is to progress from the simple to the complex. This is why Rashi is considered to be the essential commentary on Torah, the simple meaning of the text from light to weighty. And here we have this wonderful. Okay, so let me try and explain what's going on here. I'm going to try and stick to my notes so I don't ramble on too much. Okay, so we start. So here we are at the bottom. Now I talk about this progression here is the idea that when we start with revelation is the beginning. It's the pinprick. It's the little dot. Okay, the dot of the potential of our engagement that sits there as the beginning of our pathway into something greater. And that as we allow our hearts to be engaged and focus on what Hashem puts in front of us, then the language of that interaction starts to unpack and expand itself. So we start here at the bottom with the dot. And as we engage with it, in other words, as we allow our perception and our focus to be captivated by that thing, the progress of it causes us to expand. Now, this is a two-dimensional picture, but imagine it as a three-dimensional object, okay? So this is like a funnel expanding upwards. So we don't just go straight up like this. No, we take our time and we move around the idea. We move around it. And we allow our perception to expand in the swirling movement upwards. And this is something that's quite interesting, is that when we get up to this point up here, that we are confronted with another one of these. Why? Because we can't see what he wants to show us here. We could never see down here. Our capacity to perceive has to be increased. And that's what happens. It's just wonderful. So we start with very little perception and comprehension, and we grow to increase in our capacity to perceive and ponder what continues to reveal itself. And so that's why I found this picture here helpful to me. This is just me trying to come to terms with the expansion of perception. How do I How do I present this in a way that allows me to have elucidated or speak about it with greater detail? So this is just a tool that helps me do that. Now, you're probably wondering, why have I got this bit in here? Because this is a place of, I call this a place of crisis of choice. The only way to go through this is when we truly learn how to surrender to the process. Surrender to the process. Okay, so this applies to depth of learning. First comes acquaintance with the text, and only after comes the questions and a developing capacity to study. This is the pathway of learning in all things. At some point, we are confronted with a profound truth. A profound truth. When the Torah was given, this order was reversed. It had to develop from the spirituality of Hashem, both in language. It had to devolve. So in other words, it had to come down. It had to contract down. And so if you look at this in reverse, this information that we encounter when we're up here has to compress itself down into something that we can perceive. Now you're probably saying to yourself, okay, so what's the yellow part all about, Carl? Now there's two ways of looking at this, two ways that I try to explain this. One is that we are supposed to be able to bring the testimony and the witness of that down into this as well. But also this is working in reverse. This is my spiritual awareness. This is where we start. We start with this tiny little dot. That's our spiritual capacity. This yellow bit down here is our natural perception. And this is the wonder of what it means to go into Hashem, is the way I sort of perceive it. Is that the more we surrender ourselves to the process of being guided into expansion, the more our awareness of the natural realm starts to diminish. In other words, it doesn't disappear. It's just that it becomes, our focus is less of this down here and more of this up here. In other words, this doesn't disappear. It just becomes, we understand the context of it. The natural realm is only this tiny much bit significant up here. But I also like to look at it this way. So there's many layers of depth here. This is my awareness of myself. So the yellow here down the bottom, I'm more aware of me than I am of him. But as I surrender myself to this process, I become more aware of him, more aware of the way he speaks to me and what he wants to show me than I am aware of what I want to be seen, or what I want to be shown, or what I think is important. I allow the perception of myself to diminish. So, yeah, and this is just fascinating to me, because the way that God or Hashem brings us into this is he has to bring it down to our level first, but he doesn't diminish it. And this is the paradox of this, because we think that God has to diminish himself for us to become aware of. No, and this is what they talk about this in Kabbalah and Hasidism, is that God veils himself. So the information, all this is contained in this. We're just not aware of it. This progression is just our expansion of perception. This amount is always there. And this is why I talk about the Yod as well. Sorry, the Aleph, the letter Aleph, and its importance. Because the Yod below talks about the speck of who we are, our diminished self. Okay, the Yod above talks about our expanded self. In other words, our potential. We move towards that potential because we allow ourselves to be yoked to the process of coming into expanded awareness. And this is, I believe, and why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because I'm pointing out to you how the Torah purposefully with really incredible intelligence, always moves us towards a more complex understanding of things. So we look at something first. So we look at these laws of tamei and tahor. And let's try and get rid of clean and unclean. Let's forget about those words because we've attached negative connotations to them. It's not about that. It's not about God saying it. You're no good. Stay away. No, not at all. He says you're in a process of change. I want to make you aware of that process so that you know what you're moving towards. You're moving away from that condition of tamei towards tahor. The capacity to have a greater expression of that there. Oh, man, it's just exciting. This is very, very exciting. So the Torah does this in a just remarkable way. And when you become aware of it, you get excited because you are starting to see the potential of that voice having a voice within you. Think about that. Think about if Vayikra is about the sound of priesthood, the sound of his breath having an expression in us, then it's moving towards that expansion of breath. Anyway, my gosh. So, Torah reaches down from the heights of Hashem to become the possession of man. Oh my gosh. And we, in learning, retrace its path, ascending up. And it's amazing. The Torah doesn't change. We do. We are the ones who change. We grow in our capacity. We just become more aware of it. So we are learning to retrace its path, ascending from our physical situation to the spiritual closeness with Hashem. The ultimate goal of Yechida, absolute oneness with Him. The paradox of nullification within the source to realize the truth of self as a shadow of Hashem, the Betzalim. We are the Betzal. What a wonderful word. Again, you'll find this in Bereshit, the beginning of Bereshit, chapter 1, I believe it's in verse 30. We are created in His image. We are created in His Betzal. Literally, we are the within the shadow of who He is. We are like this interesting, a remarkable reflection of Him. And the goal is when we come up, again, looking back at this, as my mouse pointer, is that this is the idea of what Yechida is. Yechida. So down here, the yellow is, again, we're more aware of ourselves than we are aware of Him. Our awareness of Him really is just this dot. But as we surrender and learn how to turn the compass of our hearts and make Him our desire, we are guided into a place where the awareness of ourselves diminishes, but we don't diminish. The awareness of ourselves doesn't diminish, but it feels like it. We're just more aware. We just come into this amazing place of being more aware of Him. So this down here doesn't diminish. It just, in the light of all this, it feels like it's diminished. It feels like it's nullified, but it's not. So anyway, I hope that's helpful, because I have to point this out. There are some very complex ideas going on here in the book of Vayikra, and we've got to realize, and we've got to be okay with the idea that these things they may just be above our capacity to ever truly comprehend. Do I really understand why Hashem says that when a woman gives birth, she becomes tamei? Maybe a little bit. I'm starting to understand it. But will I ever fully understand it? I don't know. But you know what? I'm okay with that process because I'm just in awe of who He is and what He's trying to teach us here. So we've got to allow ourselves to realize that there is such a vast, amazing universe of knowing him that we're barely stepping into. We're barely stepping into it. And what a wonderful journey. What a wonderful journey. And we may not understand it, and it may, at times we're going to look at this and we're going to say, this makes no sense. I don't want to have anything to do. That idea just seems completely foreign to me. And it's okay. We need to acknowledge that, but we need to hold on to the hope and the belief that Hashem is guiding us into knowing. We've just got to be okay with the wrestling process. There is a lot of wrestling going on here. But I think it will help. It will help us if we remove from the way we think. I don't want my perception of what tamei and tahor is as clean and unclean, because that has many negative connotations for me, and I admit that quite freely. To think unclean, really, to me, I can only see that in a negative picture. But I'm allowing the covenantal interactive framework of what he says here. Again, let's look back at this. So lehavdil, to be able to distinguish. So what does this talk about? It talks about our capacity to be able to do this, to come to between ha-tamei, between this tamei, and between ha-tahor, the place of when we need to focus on what is causing us to be separate. What is the process of it? Why is it there? It's obviously there for a reason. It's there to teach us something. And then there's tahor, this place where we were able to come into an arena of expanded and elevated perception. And he's using things that seem strange between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. Again, wonderful stuff. But I allow the hope, the living hope, and the witness of his Torah to tell me that there is something here that he wants to show me. There is a reality here that is just beyond my perception. But that perception is increasing. I am changing. I am being increased so that I can perceive it with greater detail. And if I can perceive that with greater detail, it's because I've learnt to come into the language of how that is breathing towards me. And if I realize that, then I realize that I'm able to bring the articulation of that sound back into creation, so that creation can have a greater witness of that and a greater celebration of his life as a manifestation of the depth of relationship that sits inside these things. Ooh, man, that really gets me excited. It really does. So anyway, I'll stop there, and Baruch Hashem, how wonderful is his Torah, how challenging is his Torah to us. But when we allow the shalom of the atmosphere of his house to sit around us in the midst of our wrestling with that, so we learn to wrestle with what he puts in front of us, not wrestle with what's trying to distract us in the natural, then we can come into the witness of that and have the living nature of it have an expression in us. Baruch Hashem, Shalom, Shalom.